Welcome to the next section on defining. So we want to delve into a little more detail about actually starting to understand the issues that the clients may be facing in their problem statement. So let's now take a closer look at developing a logic tree to define the client problem, put some boundaries around that problem, and also look at what are the key drivers behind that particular problem. Now you'll see on the upcoming slides, so the next slide we're going to cover off a number of different types of logic trees, the ones we use most often in our consulting process. So that's the data-driven logic tree, there's one around hypothesis-driven and one around an issue map concept. So let me just walk you through those briefly to give you an understanding of how we'd use those. So the data-driven tree is where you would potentially not have a lot of knowledge about the problem area, or alternatively, there may be a lot of data that the client has on this particular area and you want to start building based on data available through their systems around the detail around those particular data fields and what are they telling you and the analysis around that data. So digging into it, could, for example, those arms on that data-driven logic tree, you could actually quantify each one of those arms, for example, through return on investment, or it could be something around driving customer satisfaction, but you might have data that enables you to actually start doing some quantification around those particular data trees. So this is where you'd start asking questions and seeing whether the data could fulfill some of the answers to those questions. So, why is this particular part of the organisation underperforming? Why are our sales revenue declining? What's driving our sales revenue? And start looking for data and then building out potentially an analytical model around that, or just answering those type of questions. The second one is around the hypothesis-driven logic tree, where you potentially could actually, if you feel that you've got enough knowledge around the problem area, develop up an initial hypothesis around the solution to that particular problem, and then look at why is that happening, how is it happening, what are the reasons behind it, and start building up asking yourselves questions and assertions around proving or disproving that particular hypothesis around the solution. And then lastly, where you potentially have a lot of information around the problem area, you could start asking the yes/no question and build out a issue map starting from the initial problem statement, and then shaping your questions to answer yes or no. So is the underperformance of the organisation, so it has a lower, its profit margins are declining? Is that because there's a price issue, so yes or no? Is there an issue around cost structures in a particular area, yes or no? So starting to build out the issues driving that particular problem of underperformance through questions and answering yes or no. So three fundamental types of logic trees that we would use in the consulting process to start shaping out, what are the issues underlying the problem. So let's just take a slightly more detailed view to give you a bit of a feel about a hypothesis tree approach. So with this hypothesis tree, you'll see on the next slide where we've given you a high-level example of hypothesis. You potentially could have a hypothesis around the solution to the problem, so present the hypothesis in that positive light versus what's causing the problem, and then build out a second level of hypothesis around what's the rationale hypothesis of why that problem's occurring. And then looking at what are the key issues driving that particular rationale around that hypothesis. So building the tree out that way. So then we move to a couple of examples, which I can walk through one or two of these, and you can certainly read them on the next few slides, where we're indicating that an organisation should reinvest in its core brands because to drive shareholder returns. And you'll see how we've built that out from a rationale perspective. So reinvesting in core brands is really the best approach to driving the performance of the business. There's no other option. So if you did take that type of approach, you then need to build up and say, well, if I'm going to reinvest in core brands, then core brands are profitable. That would be the first piece of the issue you'd need to actually understand. So are they profitable? Is there significant growth opportunities for those particular core brands? So just giving you some examples around how to start building out the thinking around that hypothesis, the rationale for it, the issues, reasons of why you think that hypothesis is correct. And if you start getting significant negative responses to these hypotheses and disproving it, that you then need to, this is a very iterative approach and it always will be, you'll need to go back and reassess your hypothesis. So that's example one. Example two is more detailed, which gives you an example of underperformance in a business and what might be driving that. And I think at this point, it's really important that you just read through those and understand the thinking around the hypothesis, the rationale, the issues that might drive out of that, and use that as a sort of a practice run for your particular project that you're going to be working on. Steps in building an issue tree, really important. So this is not something we would suggest you do on your own. This is something you could brainstorm within a group of you. Bring in, it's good to have different perspectives. So it's a good thing to have different views, different experiences within your team to actually brainstorm, mind map around what are the issues. Really important if you can bring in those different perspectives. That'll give you a much more comprehensive view of around potentially the drivers of the issues. And then potentially what you will then do is have quite a comprehensive and large mind map, which you'll then probably best to actually put into buckets and group those, and then decide which ones are really supporting the issues and the hypothesis, and help you build out that tree. So the next slide, we actually really want to make the point here that, and I just did it, refer to it, is it's a very iterative process, because you will undertake this work around a hypothesis-driven tree, and you might actually find you learn new elements to the problem, find new issues, and in fact you're not trying to solve, for example, you're not trying to lower costs to make the company more or the organisation more profitable. Maybe you should actually use the capability and capacity of that organisation with that cost structure in place to grow revenue. Might be the best option for you. So I've seen where this process has taken you from solving a cost issue to actually maybe using capacity to grow revenue, which actually then improves the results. So the point we'll make here all through this program is it is an iterative process. And as you learn, you need to rethink, revisit, reassess, and then move on. Consulting is very much that part, that part is the art and understanding of the process that we're going through. And then, as I talked a bit earlier, one of the key important things here is once you've actually been through this hypothesis approach, you need to think about which non-key issues you want to remove from the process, because that could lead, as to my colleagues have already indicated to you, I think that this could lead to you actually increasing scope. So take away those non-key issues, don't get caught up in them, because they can consume a lot of your time and consume a lot of your budget if you have one around the project. And therefore, not actually help you solve the problem that you'll face. So really, really important to remove those issues that are not key to solving the problem. Okay, then building out the work plan, we've given you on the next slide, if you can go to that now, is really just mapping out the work plan, where you'll see we've looked at the issue. We've got the issue up there because we've identified the key issues. What are we going to do to actually assess how we're performing around those issues? What's causing that issue? What can we do about fixing that issue? How does it link to the hypothesis? Maybe merge those two together. Sometimes we will do that. What analysis are you going to do? What's the source of that analysis to get the right information to do your analysis, both primary and secondary? What are you trying to actually prove out of that? So what's the deliverable out of doing that analysis? And who's going to do it by when? Really important piece of the element. Okay, and then building out finally a work program for the whole team actually, and setting out who has to do what by when. And the next slide, we've given you a real life example. So I'll let you read through that, but you can see how we've got the issue, the hypothesis, the analysis. What's the source? For example, in this case, it was a customer survey, some interviews. What's the end product you want out of it? You want to get the customer's view and understanding of how they might react to this outsourcing of a call centre in this particular example. Who's going to do it, and when do you need it by? And the who and the when is important, because that plugs into what everybody else is doing in your team to bring it all together to the next stage, which is synthesising all that information and starting to push towards a recommendation.